Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is the first video that I've made in a really long time because I took a break so that I could focus on studying. I'm about to go into my exam period, so I probably will take another little mini break after this video, but I did just want to jump on because in spite of me focusing on uni and, you know, psychology content, I've also been diving really deeply into a lot of Buddhist content and really deepening my knowledge and understanding and appreciation for Buddhism and so much of the wisdom that is carried through its texts. And I really want to go over one of the things that I've learned that I think might be helpful to any viewers that may feel stuck. You know, I just want to go over a small set of concepts and strategies that I think are really easy to implement in our everyday lives and may help relieve some suffering for you. As a fellow, I'm assuming a fellow individual living in this modern society, in this world of chaotic globalization and stress and pressure and expectations that we put on ourselves or that we have put on us. But anyways, before I keep on rambling, let's do a check-in. So let's just check in with where we are at in our bodies. Wherever you are, let's just slow down and let's take 3 deep breaths. 1 inhale through the nose with a small sip at the top. So it'll be 2 inhales, essentially 2 inhales through the nose and a nice audible exhale. And we'll do 3 of them together. All right, first one, breathing in. Okay, amazing. So I hope that you feel a little bit more present, a little bit more grounded in your body, in your sense of self. And yeah, let's just really quickly dive into this concept that I want to discuss, or these 3 practices that I'd really like to discuss that stem from in this time that I've been taking a break from making content. I've really been trying to dedicate time in my day to deepening my knowledge and my awareness about Buddhist teachings and Buddhist philosophy. And some of the ways I've been doing that have been through Sam Harris's app. So I've been listening to a lot of the talks in the theory section about Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist teachings, particularly the Dzogchen tradition, which is the Tibetan form of Buddhism. But I also think that there is a lot that can be garnered from Zen Buddhism as well. All of the Buddhist thoughts and traditions are interwoven. But I believe James Lowe talks about the Dzogchen, the Tibetan non-dual tradition of Buddhism. And I've just been finding so much resonance and depth of learning in that. And so there are a few series on the Waking Up app. I will put them here. I might put a screenshot. And it's just narrations and basically discussions by James Lowe. He's got a wealth of knowledge, and I would highly recommend the talks that he does if you do have the Waking Up app. It's been really powerful to be able to listen to those talks. Some of them go for like hours. And yeah, I've just been doing that day to day. And in addition to that, I've been reading a lot. So I've still been reading this book called Buddhism is True, as well as this new one, which I've started, called Seeing That Freeze: Meditations on Emptiness and Dependent Arising by Rob Burby. And it's literally like a Bible. Like, it literally feels like a Bible. The pages are so thin. I am just inching my way. I'm reading it every day, but it's so incredibly rich with knowledge and insight, and it's just highly recommend. It's amazing. I don't ever want to put it down because every word that I'm reading, every chapter, every section, I'm like, I've never learned this before. I've never thought about this before. I never thought so deeply about these concepts and ways of practicing meditation and practicing in my day and integrating all of these Buddhist, these Buddhist lessons and principles into my life. And it's just been so enriching. And so that's it there. And today, obviously, I don't want to I could do a whole podcast or a whole video on the concept of emptiness and how everything is empty on a fundamental level. But we don't have time today. So I just want to touch on, obviously, one of the key ideas, touted in Buddhism is that the self is the root of all suffering. And the self our concept of the self through our thoughts and conceptions of who we are, around ideas and self-images, images of what we think we are and who we think we are, that can go hand in hand. It's inherent with craving. And suffering is inherent to craving. Craving is suffering. And craving obviously also includes and encompasses aversion, right? So a craving to avoid something, right? To escape some kind of pain or some kind of discomfort. But then we can also have craving that's like very approach orientated, where we are craving some kind of release through a material object or food or a sensual experience. And, in this section of the book, the author talks about this idea of, let's say you are some kind of corporate, like you're a student or you're working some kind of corporate job when you've got to give a talk, okay? You've got to give some kind of presentation in front of a lot of people and the expectations seem really high. There's a lot that can go into that around craving and our sense of self that we might not even comprehend on face value, Let's say you're someone that has really kind of underlying anxiety around public speaking. So the night before the presentation, you have all these ideas about how can I avoid this? Should I just call in sick? And it's like, all right, well, if I call in sick, then I don't have to do it. But then you're still going to have, like, that provides instant relief in a way, because it's like, oh, you're absolving yourself of this negative experience. But then what's the aftermath of that entail? Negative thoughts of guilt and shame about not actually showing up and lying, and then that can like prolong the experience of dukkha or suffering. So suffering and our ways in which we crave to avoid it, or, crave pleasure and like always wanting to preference one option over another, just always leads us to these inevitable cycles of suffering. Like you just can never escape it, and you can never escape it until you realize that everything is fundamentally empty and we don't need to exist with these preferences. But again, I'm going on a tangent. Anyways, the author in this section basically just provides 3 practices that we can do in our daily lives to relieve that sense of tension and suffering that we can feel, the sense of contraction or solidity in our experience about, with our attitudes about certain things. The solidity that we feel of, I don't like that, or I don't want to do that, or I do like that. How can we release those tendencies that we have to cling onto these ways of being or seeing the world or judgments or whatever it might be? We can apply it to so many different situations and so many different circumstances. How can we release that or gradually make that hot sense of tightness feel less so? And so I'm going to be talking about these 3 practices that you can do in your everyday life that are just really powerful, I think, but also really simple. And it helps, if you've been meditating or you're a meditator. Otherwise, you can still do this. I think you can still conceptually implement this and integrate these practices into your everyday life. So, okay. So, the first practice is to welcome a sense of openness and spaciousness in your environment, in whatever situation you're in. So if you are approaching this talk, right, that you're really nervous about, or a piece of assessment, or an uncomfortable conversation or something, what can help relieve the sense of internal suffering or angst we might feel is by encompassing a sense of spacious mindfulness of the environment. I know I've done this before, and I've done it, and I think it's just innate to who I am because I grew up in nature and in an environment where I'm very grateful that, I just had a lot of vast views of nature that allowed me to have my awe captured and almost like my mind become more present. It helps you become more present. That's fundamentally what this practice does. I'll just read an excerpt. So, when there is craving, a grasping or holding on to, or an energetic movement to be rid of something, practice bringing a spacious mindfulness to the experience of the craving, and particularly to the sense of pressure or tension that it involves in the body. Notice how the felt pressure of the craving unfolds in time, intensifying, peaking, and then maybe gradually subsiding. Can you get a sense how mindfully allowing it to do so develops the capacity to tolerate the experience of craving and gradually disempowers it? Notice too the corresponding rise and fall in the experience of suffering accompanying the craving. What else do you notice when you do this? Now, another, like in that, what I've found helpful is just being able to foster awareness, perceptual awareness of the environment. So noticing the color of the walls, noticing the sky outside the window, noticing any noises that you might hear in the environment. Is there a quiet humming or a buzzing? Is there distant conversations happening? Really allowing yourself to take up space, mindful space, as you are enacting whatever thing you don't want to be enacting, right? Or doing something that you don't want to get caught up in terms of craving. Establish a sense of spaciousness in that, because it not only allows you to foster a sense of presence, but it takes you out of the narrowness of that concentration on whatever you're fixating on. It allows you to zoom out, right? Zoom out, and you take in this bigger, broader perspective that we so easily lose touch of and lose sight of. You know, sometimes like this, I think, goes hand in hand with some forms of visualization practices, right? Like, I think in our everyday lives, we can just forget that there's an entire world out there. There's an entire 8 billion people living their lives with all these tiny little events and interdependent, interactive events unfolding, right? And instances that are unfolding in every single moment. How you perform on the day in that exam is just one tiny little slice of a billion other things that are happening in that exact moment. So really, how significant is it? Not really that significant. And that allows you to release the tension of the angst you might feel about whatever action that might be. Or you can think about a certain kind of instance where you might be clinging on to someone, okay? Or clinging on to something, okay? Or your idea of something, or something, the way you want something to be, right? If you just zoom out of that and allow yourself to encompass a sense of spacious mindfulness, you can, all of a sudden, that gripping to whatever you want to grip to for how something must be the way it must be something this way, you know, like I must work out for this long, or I must be this weight, or I must reach this goal or this body fat percentage, or I must have this person, or I must do this thing with someone, or this person must respond to me in this certain way that I want them to respond to me like. If you just actually allow your mind and body to step out of that clinging, okay, and to instead encompass the world more broadly and just your environment more broadly through your senses, noticing how things look, noticing how things sound, noticing how things taste. You can even experiment doing this when you're eating, okay, and it makes the experience so much more pleasurable and less tense, okay, and it releases any suffering that may be concentrated in that experience. So, moving on to the second practice, which involves, this is a bit more meta, and this does require a little bit of meditative practice, but it basically involves dropping in and witnessing how you're feeling internally. So you could look at the first practice as being more of an exteroceptive exercise, whereas this is more of an interoceptive exercise. So I'm going to read the little blurb here about it. So when you notice that there is craving or clinging present in relation to some object of any of the six senses, practice sustaining a focused attention on the experience. The shifting quality of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality of that object moment to moment. As you do so, see if you can get a sense of the moment-to-moment arising of the craving from whatever mind state you're operating in. If the mind state seems to be feeding reactive thoughts, notice what effects staying concentrated on that mind state has on the strength and amount of these thoughts, and on the degree of entanglement in them. So what effect does your sustained attention have on your own mindset, right? And the clinging and craving that's stemming from that. Observe the effects on the whole sense of the suffering involved or that you may be experiencing. Again, what else do you notice when you do this? So this is essentially about investigating, well, what are the causes and the interdependent, what are the interdependent causes that are leading to this mindset or this frame of reference that we have that is making us suffer, okay, in the experience. Or when you're having some kind of sensual experience, kind of try and take a step back and become a witness to what's going on internally. See if you can drop back and witness the thoughts involved, the thoughts involved and the feelings unraveling as the experience is playing out. And this can kind of generate almost like a liminal space of detachment, and this liminal space of like watching the experience or being present with the experience but not clinging to the experience. And it can just be very freeing. And I did change some of the words here because he uses Buddhist terms like Vedana and papancha. Yeah, that's what I thought. So Vedana refers to the hedonic tone of an experience, right? So when you are, let's say, a little bit hungry and you're craving some food, there's a certain hedonic tone to that experience, right? Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Like when you finally sit down to have the meal, okay? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? What's going on? When you are having an uncomfortable conversation with someone, what's the hedonic tone of that? It's usually a tone of contraction and a tone of, I don't want to be here. This is uncomfortable, or I feel insulted, or, you know, it's like contraction. So it's basically, this practice is about recognizing that feeling tone, okay? Recognizing that sensation that's going on cognitively, emotionally, sensationally, right, in the body, and trying to establish a sense of liminal space between it, all right? And just recognizing that that's arising, you know, that's arising, and being conscious of that. But where is it arising from? It's arising from nothing, essentially, right? We can't locate that. And what we see is that unfolds in a way that generates papancha, which is essentially conceptual proliferation, right? So when you are experiencing something pleasurable or something negative, when you walk away from that negative conversation, you engage in papancha. Sorry, I'm still trying to pronounce the words. You engage in that, right? You don't just walk away and like forget about it. Oftentimes our mind keeps going and thoughts keep generating, and we keep on dwelling on certain terms, certain attitudes, certain feeling tones, certain instances of Vedana that we experienced in that interaction, right? Any interaction or event. Papancha can be generated from it, and then that papancha leads to more suffering, right? Because we want to relieve ourselves of that mental chatter, or maybe we have this low-lying, like from the hedonic tone, we have this positive experience with food, like we get a glazed donut, okay, we binge on the glazed donuts, and then, oh my gosh, after that I feel so guilty, I feel so much shame. But then your brain knows that that's always there as an option to relieve yourself of some kind of suffering or discomfort or stress, okay? So you have this ongoing papancha of like, all right, well, now I have that I can cling to. I have that thing that I can cling to, or that thing that I can fall back on to consume, to relieve myself of future suffering. But if we encompass this practice of allowing ourselves to create some liminal separation by observing how these feeling tones arise, how they change over time as we stay present with them, then they can gradually release their grip on us, or what we feel is like their grip on us. They don't actually have a grip on us at all. Okay, so that's the second practice. Now, we're finally there. The third practice, which I also think is amazing, but also somewhat morbid, and maybe something that, you know, people might hear and be like, oh, I don't really like the sound of that. That sounds a little bit extreme, or that sounds a little bit like hoo-ha. It's not, and it's something that I've also been doing for quite a bit of time. And again, it's interesting, like I love these practices, but they are kind of practices that I've just naturally cultivated and lent on and started doing in my meditation journey. But it's so beautiful to see it laid out in text like this, because I started meditating 7 years ago. I probably started doing these kinds of things to relieve suffering like 3-4 years into my practice. So it's cool that like I discovered these and I've experienced these practices before I actually read about them. But let's get to the third one, which is softening the view. That's what it refers to. And it basically involves deliberately encouraging an attitude of metta, or loving kindness, toward other people. So this is particularly useful in times, for example, when we are dealing with other people, either in conversation or when we're dealing with conflict, or when we have, like an exam. You know, you can also extend this metta or loving kindness to yourself as well. I think that's equally just as important. But let's take the example of the person giving a speech, okay? By getting up and realizing that your audience members are no different to you, okay? They're just human beings, right? Empty human beings. You've got nothing to worry about. Like all of a sudden, all of the suffering and all of the built up chatter, you know, in your mind about what could go wrong, what might go wrong, what are they going to think of me? You know, all this, you know, self-absorbent kind of like thought loops that go on and on and on that generate all this anxiety. You can relieve that when you just realize like everyone in that room that you're presenting to is going to die. You're going to die. This is one, you know, 20-minute presentation within a lifetime of minutes that you have to live. And again, you can see how beautifully this pairs with the other two practices, particularly the practice involving exteroception, okay, and really zooming out, allowing yourself to zoom out and look at things more broadly, taking a broad overview of like where you are in the world and your place in the world, and this one event, how important and significant is it really in the entirety of the universe? It's not really that important, okay? And it allows this calming and this relieving of the tightness and the grip of suffering that we can get ourselves into. And so here it says, there is the possibility of deliberately bringing in a way of looking wherein you see their mortality, holding a strong awareness that in not very many years, everyone in the room, including yourself, will be dead. You might even see them as skeletons sitting there listening to you. This awareness of mortality may relativize the perceived import of the whole situation in a helpful way. And in acknowledging your shared fragility and fate as human beings, this awareness may also soften your heart, and so then foster a view of compassion. Less perception of difference between self and other is being supported when we contemplate what we share, and so less separation between self and other is sensed. Because there is a sense of less separation, there is less fear, and there is less self-constructed. So how beautiful is that, right? When we're in this open sense of self and who we are, there's less of a differentiation and less of a demarcation that we experience between ourselves and others. You know, there's this kind of merging of oneness into emptiness as we realize we're all empty, okay? You know, not only are we made up of like nearly empty matter, but everything that we spew into the world is empty. It's just all empty, 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 empty. But I think recognizing our shared fragility, okay, and our shared mortality in a given situation. It doesn't even have to be an event or, you know, something where you're performing. It can just be in an interaction, right, on a day-to-day basis. Like, and it helps you foster presence with those you love, right? Because you can recognize in every moment that could be the last moment that you're speaking with a dear friend or a dear family member. And you realize the impermanence of everything. And when you realize that and you carry yourself in that way and you carry that truth into conversations and situations, you are so much more present and you are so much more, I'd say, stringent with your time and your attention, and you move with compassion for others. You allow yourself to make mistakes, you allow others to make mistakes, and you don't sweat the small things because you realize like it's not that much of a big deal. Things, getting up and speaking in front of 20 people for 10 minutes isn't that much of a big deal, right? So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it was a little bit rambly. I hope it was a bit coherent, but we'll just go over the three practices once more. The first is allowing yourself to embody a sense of mindful spaciousness and awareness. The second is allowing yourself to drop into your body and observe any feeling tones or hedonic tones that are playing out, examining how they change in a given experience or sense of craving. And the third is softening your view by fostering a sense of deliberate loving kindness to other people on the basis of recognizing our shared mortality and shared fragility as human beings, okay? And recognizing that sameness there to dissolve the sense of self and thereby dissolve suffering and dukkha. So all those practices I hope I've explained can really dissolve dukkha in such a beautiful way. And they're all practices that you can just do in any moment, right? You can just do it. You can just drop in and you don't need any fancy tool. You don't need to go spend money on anything, right? Yeah, so I just really hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, have found it somewhat helpful, and I hope you know that wherever you are loved and you are enough. And I'll see you when I next post a video.